All right. So last week we were discussing. The Rebbe was complaining about the fact that you have so many of Hashem's children are getting lost every year, and he was complaining that many of the Rosh Hashivas don't seem to notice. They're very happy with the few Bachrim they have, and then he went on to complain. He said even those that they do have, when they're young, many of them are forced to leave the yeshiva. They can't stay in yeshiva their whole lives. And we're not so certain that we're really holding on to them, that we're really giving them enough tools that they won't throw the whole thing away when they leave. So somebody pointed out to me on one of the recordings, somebody listened to one of the recordings, the question about whether is the Rebbe saying that this is something that has to be done for everybody, or we're just looking for the problem children. Personally, I'm not 100% sure. Personally, I think that he's saying this is necessary for everybody. I think that even the kids, that there are many kids that go through the system, even if the system is flawed, and come out okay. It sounds to me like the Rebbe holds that, and he told me that in one of the Rebbe's other svarim, in Derech HaMelech on Parshas Baaloscha, that he sounds like that this is necessary for everybody. It's not just you could do the regular system, and if it doesn't work, then you need to take this approach. It seems like his mahalach is that this is really the right way for every child, and even that child who might get through the system, like he mentioned, those few who make it through the system, it seems like they would benefit from this also, and would be the ideal. I wonder though, like if the Rebbe saw the size of the schools today, how he would deal with it? Would it be that you have to have a custom tailored program for everybody, or would it be that you can have a standard system and then some support? I'm not sure, but he certainly seems to be advocating pretty strongly a case for individualized attention and trying to draw out, as opposed to imposing the teacher or the father's derech on the child to try to bring out that child's derech. And it could be that two children that grow up in the same house have very different drachim because their neshamas speak to a different way. So he's continuing with this concept. He says, Bechlal, we're on page Yud Gimel, the first full paragraph. Bechlal, Regilim anu lahabit al bnei hanayar hamischaper. We tend to look at those children who are going off the derech, that are being kaifrim. Kilu rak heim hashemim. We look at nebuch, they're bad apples, right? We say that they're bad kids. What can we do? We tried. We gave them a good upbringing. We paid thousands of dollars in tuition, and they went off the derech. But anu legamri nikiyim. We did our part. We sent them to good yeshivas. We always had a kosher home, right? Aval mikol tzidkas Avram Avinu. If I asked you, can you write a hesped for Avram Avinu? Right? There's probably a lot of things we don't know Avram Avinu. We only know a little bit about what the Torah tells us in some midrashim. But I imagine anything that we've ever heard at any hesped would have been applicable to Avram Avinu as well. Right? He was a brilliant Talmud Chacham. He was a real tzaddik. He had a lot of milas, I'm sure. If Hashem chose him to start the Jewish people with, he probably was a very impressive person. So if all of those compliments were there for the taking, Hashem uses a very strange one, which is Hizkir Hashem v'Amar Lav ki yedativ lamana sheyitzava ezbana v'ezbeisei achra v'shamru derech Hashem. Of all the wonderful things he could have said about Avram Avinu, he gave tzedakah, he was a Baal Chesed. Hashem chose to identify the fact that he taught his family after the derech Hashem to follow the derech Hashem. That's the greatest thing Hashem could compliment Avram Avinu, which means that's obviously the most impressive thing that a person can do. All the other things are wonderful, but the important thing is that he has to raise his children in the right path. Kol dar v'dar b'Yisrael, every generation in Jewish history, tabas b'shalshelas hayuchsin shalanu, is a different ring, a link in the chain. It's a chain that sharosh kshuru b'Avram Avinu. That chain began with Avram Avinu. V'soifim Mashiach tzidkenu sheyovav meher b'yameinu. And it will end at the times of Mashiach. They were all part of this one chain. Kol dar mekabel emuna Torah v'yira. Every generation receives emuna, Torah, and yira. Min hadar shekdamai, from the one before it. Va'ovid behenes Hashem, and with them they serve Hashem. U'moishul adar she'achav, and then its job is to pass it on to the next generation. U'lamanash yitzave ezbanav ze ikur kiyumenu. That is the secret of the Jewish people, that we pass on what we took from the generation before us, and we pass it on to the generation after. That's the secret of the Jewish people. And that's how Hashem complimented Avram Avinu. That's why Avram Avinu was capable of being the first Jew to start this nation, because he got that. Without that, that's the recipe that you need in order to make this project work. Even in our generation, the chain has not stopped. We pass it on to the next generation. But let's think for a minute. So therefore, is it really just the responsibility of those kids that went off the derech? That they were bad apples. We tried, and aren't they also children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with holy souls? Why therefore do we deceive ourselves with silly answers, saying, we sit there we say, look, I want to teach my kid. I want to teach him. They're guilty because they don't. He doesn't want to learn. He can't sit still. He'd rather be watching TV. He'd rather be playing a video game. He'd rather be doing something else. I'm ready to teach. I'm standing here with my sefer. I'm ready to teach him. He says, because even if it's true that there is some guilt on their part, and maybe they carry a big portion of the weight, and they refuse to listen. And he's saying this a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Let's picture these criminals, these poishim in front of us, as if he's saying a little bit, he's mocking us, those of us who defend ourselves. Let's picture these same exact criminals are terrible children, the kids at risk who are so terrible. If they would have been in earlier generations, would they also not have received? If these children who are problem children, if they were by the Berditchever, right, or if they were by the Rebbe himself, do you think that they would have had the same difficulty that we're having, or maybe they would have been a little bit more successful? With all their guilt and all their defects of their soul that they have now, it's true. The youth face different challenges than they did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But let's take these children today with all their challenges. If they were by those Gedolim, we don't think they would have had a better success rate? Wouldn't most of them have turned out to be tzaddikim? Good, simple Jews with emunah. He says, you know where the fault is? The fault lies with us. We're not as sincere as they were. And the kids pick up on that. They know when their father's faking it. They know that the father's going to shul, because what else is he going to do Shabbos morning? But he doesn't really feel like going to shul. He just, whatever, he heard that they got a good bottle of scotch this week, and he heard, and what else is he going to do? He can't sit home. He can't turn on the TV. So what's he going to do? He's going to sit home a whole Shabbos. It's a long day. So he goes to shul. He comes in, So the kids pick up on that. They know that his father's not running to shul to daven. So he's also not running to shul to go daven. And, generally the generations fall a little bit. So his father still felt an obligation to go to shul at least on Shabbos. He doesn't feel that obligation anymore, right? Had they lived generations before with all their problems and with all the challenges that they face, but they would have seen real Jews. I once heard a story from, I think it was Rabbi Weinberger, said a story about that there was a woman who was a survivor, and she said that she remembered from before the war that the women who used to be Meiser Nefesh, to go into the mikveh in the freezing cold, their children grew up to be the ones to walk into the gas chambers with song on their lips. They were willing to die al Kiddush Hashem b'simcha, because they saw to their mothers that their mothers were willing to sacrifice for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's how they learned. That's how they sensed it. So he says, so it's very nice. We want to blame the kids, but we're also not giving them something to tap into. And again, we pointed out 1,000 times, this was written 100 years ago, so this hasn't gotten better. This has not gotten better. He identified this problem already then. When it comes to educating the young generation, they were much more charedim, but the trembling before God, and they were fire. They were torches of fire, and they were burning with fire. They didn't give up and just say, with calmly say and with a cold spirit, to try to defend themselves. The younger generation is going to is falling into the pit, and what can we do? Am Hashem Neifel B'Chvira, the nation of Hashem is falling into kfira, into heresy, Rahman al-Itzlan, right? And so they didn't look for excuses, right? The Rebbe is saying, our generation, we look for excuses. What is it that we blame everything else? The Rebbeim are not so good. The yeshivas are not so good. I can't compete with the internet, with text. Whatever. We like to blame everything. And it's true that they're all challenges that the kids have. But the Rebbe says the bottom line is you're not giving them something to feel real. Barash hayukamim, that those earlier generations would get up with a lot of noise. They would give over their entire souls, everything they had to save them. They would look for different ideas and different strategies how to bring them back. If so, Dar HaGodol Mehem, Dar HaMechanach, us, the one who is responsible for training the next generation, Asher Aleinu HaChoiv Limsa Lehem Es Kedushas Hashem Terasa Avadasai, we have the obligation to pass on the Kedusha of Hashem, Torah and Avodah. We can't sit back and say in a very calm, relaxed manner, our hands didn't spill. He's playing on the Egla Rufa, right? That the Chacham that the Bezdin would come from the closest city when they found the dead body between two cities and would say, we didn't spill this blood. We can't say that. We don't have the right to say that. We can't sit back calmly and say that. What will we say before Hashem? And what how will we justify ourselves before HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When after 120 years Hashem is going to want to count, like where's all the product that I gave you a chance with? I trusted you with them. They weren't given to you to do what you want with. You were entrusted with them. Where are they? Hashem imarim yishag. Hashem will roar from on high, and he'll give out a voice, Banai Heichanheim, where are my children? Banai Rechume, Bnei Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Heichanheim, where are they? Where are all these children of Avram Yitzchak Yaakov? What happened to them? Bi'ata. And now, in Be'emes Roitzim Anu Loshav, in the bottom of page Yodal, in Be'emes Roitzim Anu Loshav El Hashem, if we really want to return to Hashem, L'sakin es Hashivasnu, and fix what we ruined, Ivasnu Bazeh, we have to recognize our share of the blame. Even if there are flaws in these children. It's true, the Rebbe says, every generation has a whole new set of flaws that nobody before had to deal with, right? Certainly our grandfathers didn't know how to get a kid to look up from his cell phone, right? There wasn't a challenge that they had to deal with. So yes, there are challenges that are new, unique, maybe more difficult in our generation. So the Rebbe is saying, I'm agreeing with you. I'm not telling you that it's completely, we're the first, we're just not doing our job completely. But besides recognizing their flaws that weren't there before, why have we neglected them? Without looking at it while they're still young. In other words, what he's saying is, true that it might take some work, and we don't know all the answers on their face, but we have to start looking and investigating from at a very early age, because just because it's a new challenge doesn't mean we could say, well, there's nobody dealt with this before, so we give up. You have to work with it. And we have to look for ways to cure them. Right? We have to figure out how we can heal them. Would a father or a guardian be happy to say, I'm innocent from my child's injury? Imagine you have a father, and the kid cuts himself. He's riding his bike, cuts himself. Happens all the time. Every kid has done it, right? And what happens is, as that infection is ignored, the father ignores it, and as it infects, it comes to a point where the kid is in serious trouble with his infections, where maybe there's talk of amputation with this. Can a father say, I didn't do it. I didn't cause this kind of infection, and all I ignored was a small little cut. What do you want from me? It would have been, if he would have put a little Neosporin on it originally with a Band-Aid, right, it would have been fine. But Rak Rashlusai, by his ignoring it, by his neglect, then his limbs started to rot away. Would anybody accept that father's defense? It was a little cut, big deal. What did I do? I didn't give him the cut. And what did I, it happened, it developed. No father that defense wouldn't work, right? Neglect is just as bad sometimes as actually inflicting the damage. With all their guilt and all their negatives, we cannot place the blame on them alone, and to sit there and to sigh, oh, kids these days, right? What am I supposed to do? Kids these days, they're so complicated. Well, what should we do? That's the way they are. They're difficult. We have to feel pain, and worry in the heart, on our neglect. Over our neglect. Then we could start to come up with tools. So the Rebbe is saying, as new challenges arise, you're going to have to be creative. I can't give you all the answers. I can't tell you exactly, but you can't sit back and say, I don't know what to do. We have to continuously look, and we have to search for things. To heal the broken part of our people. Oh, what was that? I think I just killed a bug on my safe. All right. But Hashem nispalel, shirenu derech. We have to daven to Hashem that He show us the way. Right? What a Jew doesn't know the answer, so he davens to ask for help finding the answer. V'ez leva evan shel bnei hanar yasir, and to take away the heart of stone of these young of the young generation. V'kulanu yachad niskel of deu be'emes of lev shalom, so we can all be zoichet to serve Hashem in truth with a full heart. V'liyos mi Yisrael asher b'cho espar, be part of the Jewish people that Hashem says He'll boast about. That Hashem says, I boast about my children. V'noimar, and we can say to Hashem after 120, Chaziba hai broda seina legabach. Look at this child that was placed that I placed with you. We can tell Hashem that look at the child that you placed with us. We took care of it. You gave us a pikadon and we took care of it. Next paragraph on Tezvav. Loi bahash oros. Now the Rebbe is saying, but I'm not telling you. Don't just start guessing. Don't say, oh, maybe this will work, maybe that work. Rak bechukim esanim. We have to have strong principles. Uva uvdos chazakas. We need hard facts. We need to know what's going on. First step is, the Rebbe says that you're right. What we said before, each generation is different. So the first thing we have to do is, the fact that it worked when your father raised you doesn't mean it's going to work when you're raising your son. Every generation is different. What worked for you won't necessarily work for your son. That's the first thing. We have to identify what's different about the newer generations. Why is it that in earlier generations, by and large, if you go back 200 years ago, they sat the kid down in front of a Gemara and he learned. It basically worked. The system worked. You didn't need to be so creative. You didn't have to be, every Rebbe today has to be like a full-time entertainer. He has to be funny, and he has to have a good voice. He has to keep the kids engaged. By and large, till 200 years ago, maybe even more recently than that, you put the kids in front of a Gemara and they learned. That was it. Talmidei kol melamed uvnei kol av. Rubam kulam hayu ovdei Hashem. For the most part, 90% came out good Jews. It's no longer that way. Hasiba pshuta veikar is he. So what's the reason? What's the change? What changed in these later generations? And I would assume that he wrote this 100 years ago, that it just continued to get worse. But this is basically the change. He says, children today, everybody today, thinks that they're much more advanced than they really are. They think that they can already make decisions more than they already are, right? You could sit today at a table. I don't know, maybe you remember when today at a table, and you could talk about any topic, and the 7-year-old has no problem chiming in. I remember once we were at a Shabbos table, and I remember who was with, and somebody's kid was there, 8, 9 years old, and he said, "I never saw anything like this in my whole life." Oh, the whole 8 years you never saw this? Okay, now I understand he's just mimicking an expression that he heard from his father or he heard from his Rebbe. But the truth is, the kids today feel like I know as much as anybody else, right? I'm already a balabas. I know exactly. He says we're not talking about guessing. I'm not guessing. The Rebbe's not saying. I'm not saying maybe this is a possibility of what's going on here. Even the non-Jewish world recognizes this. There's a chutzpah in the young people that didn't exist, right? 100 years ago, if a kid's father told him something, he didn't argue. He didn't ask him 46 questions. He took it It took it as halacha l'mashvi. Maybe they had the opposite problem. Getting kids to think on their own was probably a little bit more difficult, to think outside the box a little bit. But if a father told his son that the sky was green, the sky was green. There wasn't, you didn't question what you. Today, he knows better than his father, and he knows, right? That's the nature of today's youth, and it gets worse with every generation. I'm sure my generation was worse than my father's, and my kids is worse than mine. That's the progression that the Rebbe already saw back then. He says, you want to know why that is? I don't know. Either he did know, and this is not what we're dealing with. It's not important for us to understand why. The bottom line is that's the reality. Why? You can have all kinds of theories, but the bottom line is this is what the situation is. They already have their own set of theories. They have their own desires. They know what's best. While his whole psychological makeup is still upside down, unripe, and bitter. It's not there yet. Chazal already told us that this was going to happen. That Chazal say that in the last generations before Mashiach, chutzpah will prevail. It'll be everywhere, which means this is that people don't recognize. Don't know their place. Everybody's a bigger expert than the next guy, right? Even it's not only the kids, by the way; it's also by adults. You could have a guy, who has absolutely no medical training, and he'll give his theories to the doctor, and he's not embarrassed. Like the guy who's the professor of Harvard Medical School, who's been studying this particular issue for the last 50 years. You'll have some guy who's an accountant offer his theories. I have an idea, There's that type of chutzpah that people don't recognize that maybe somebody else knows more than me about something. It's a chutzpah. You can rely on me. I can rely on my own. I don't need to learn from anybody. I can rely on my own judgment. Right? This has taken hold so strongly, we're sometimes so taken aback. You see little kids, literally. They have this sense of self, and they have this false sense about them. They already consider themselves like adults. You can't tell them what to do. Don't tell me what to do, right? He says, but we'll just start the next paragraph. We're not going to finish it on page Tes Zayin. He says, what comes out of this? What's the problem here that we have to address? That's the reality. For better or for worse, whatever the reason is, that's the reality. That's how kids are today. He says, we have two negative outcomes of this. When a child has this kind of attitude, every parent and authority figure and a teacher seems to him to be a foreign overlord. You're telling me what to do. Who are you to tell me what to do? Go to sleep? Why should I listen to you? Brush your teeth? Anything. Whatever you tell the kid. This guy is just coming to impose his will on me. You're coming to rule over him with a strong hand, and to take away his independence. I'm an independent person. I'll decide when I want to go to sleep. I'll decide when I want to brush my teeth. You're trying to squash his personality. That's how they feel. They end up having it becomes a contentious relationship because they see you as opposition. Even a type of hatred develops towards a father, towards a teacher. I'm sorry. He doesn't want to hear their words. And how he can make them part of him, take them into his heart. All he wants to know is, how do I get away from them? How do I not have them be in charge of me? What's the second problem? Which is maybe worse than the first one. The first one, I'm going a little fast. We'll start again from that beginning of that paragraph, but the first one, the problem is it makes the father and the teacher have to be much more creative. You can't walk in like they once did and say, do this, don't do that. Now already it's going to take a little bit more to get to them because they don't want to hear, do this, do that. What's the second one, which he says is possibly worse than the first one? When in the earlier generations, when the child was not, his essence was not rushing to develop. He understood, an 8-year-old understood, he's only 8. What was the result there? He didn't start to develop all of his own feelings and opinions and attitudes before their time. He was like a blank piece of paper. So his teachers and his parents were able to start to mold him, because he was a piece of clay, just a rough piece of clay, and they had the ability to start to mold him. They would feed him like an ox. They would just stuff him with all kinds of Torah and avodah, good stuff. Not just words. They would give their hearts and souls into their children, into their students, and they would chisel their impression onto his soul. And then when his own personality would start to blossom, would start to come through, he was already fertile with Torah, and he was already fattened by the oils of holy oils. And then his personality, his own personality, would build upon that wonderful foundation. And then, of course, different children had different ways. Shlomo Melech said his thing early on, but at least you started with some kind of a blank canvas to begin. And then he would grow built on that foundation. But it's no longer that way in this generation. It comes out before its time. Already all of his ideas, his concepts, right? His hashkafa. He has his own hashkafa. Right? His Rebbe is telling him things that Gedolim have told for 100 years, and he has an alternate theory. I heard this story also once from Weinberger. I don't think in connection with this, but he said that he was in Rav Soloveitchik's Shiur. So he once said in Shiur, he said over a Ramban, and one of the students raised his hand and he gave like an alternate theory. So Soloveitchik said to him, maybe not, but that's not what the Ramban is saying. So the kid says, I'm choylek on the Ramban. So he said he still remembered the way he did. He said he took off his glasses and he turned his head completely sideways, and he said, "What did you just say?" What do you mean you're choylek on the Ramban? But that's what you had. There's that chutzpah today that the Ramban had his opinion. I have my opinion. Like, why? I heard this story also once from Rabbi Hartman. Who wrote on the Marals. He said he was a kid. His father was a rabbi in St. Louis. Or his father, I don't know if he was a rabbi or they lived in St. Louis, and there was a Rav somewhere in the middle of America, from like out of town type of place, and he was there for Shabbos. Either he was stuck in St. Louis or he was there for Shabbos. So they had a conversation about halacha, and somebody at the table quoted a Rav Moshe Feinstein. So this rabbi piped in and said, "I disagree. I paskin otherwise." So he said to him, "What do you do with Rav Moshe's tshuva? Like it's Rav Moshe." So he said, he still remembers the guy clear as day. He said to him, he goes, "Young man, Rabbi Feinstein is a rabbi, and I'm a rabbi." You understand that it's ridiculous, right? But so but not everybody understands. He didn't think he was saying something ridiculous. He didn't know he was going to be quoted 30 years later on a shiur by some kid he never met. I'm sure he was a wonderful guy. I don't mean to say anything negative about whoever he was, but we understand you're not Rav Moshe Feinstein. Like you can't. So the same thing here. His Rebbe's trying to teach him Torah, and he has his own ideas already. He's not. There's nothing There's nothing there to be makabel. He's not willing to receive. When they're still unripe and poisonous, they're already starting to do their own investigations. They don't want to hear what their Rebbe or their father has to say. They're already doing their own research. Which I'm sure the Rebbe didn't even imagine how Google would exacerbate that, right? Where the kid could be an expert on everything in 10 seconds. Even things that are asur to him, like his own man, and he's already having feelings and emotions that he's not prepared for. He's not. Is it possible, starting off with these feelings of these poisonous ideas and feelings, that he's not going to end up with longings and yearnings that are kosher? It's going to be very difficult if he's starting off crooked to later on end up with some kind of a straight result is going to be a very difficult task. And that he's saying, he's identifying this is the problem. Now, the good news is that he also gives us the solution, which we'll get to, but at least he's identifying first for us the problem and why it's different and why it may be different. In each generation this gets worse and it comes out in different ways, and why it's difficult, because, parents very often remember, this worked when I was a kid, so why can't it work with my kids? It doesn't work that way. Every generation develops in a different way, and it creates its own unique set of problems that we need to identify. Shkoyach.